Hello, and welcome back to Alice Talks Football, and welcome back to a live Manchester United news, transfer news, and update show where we're going to be discussing all the latest Manchester United news. Today, Michael Carrick set to be announced later today as he's overtaken Ollie in the race to become the interim manager of Manchester United. One other candidate was interviewed. I think that was Ruud van Nistelrooy. But it's not officially confirmed yet. Something could change last minute, but every kind of source is saying it could be announced later today that Michael Carrick is going to take charge of Man United before the end of the season. Chris Wheeler said, as well as impressing Berardi and Wilcox, Carrick is also said to have support within the dressing room from Manchester United players who worked with him when he was part of the coaching staff under Mourinho and Solskjaer before taking the caretaker charge of games against Villarreal, Chelsea and Arsenal, where he went unbeaten in the 2021-22 season. An announcement could be made on Monday, although sources believe the process may take longer. That is your update on Michael Carrick. Michael Carrick will hold further talks with United today over becoming the interim manager, and Carrick and his reps are having another meeting with United. He is now the front runner, but Solskjaer has not been ruled out yet. Face-to-face talks started on Thursday. Now, Michael Carrick worked at Middlesbrough. Michael Carrick did a good job at Middlesbrough. He got Middlesbrough to a Carabao Cup semi-final. You know, Amarim's not progressed that far in a domestic cup, you could say, but I'm not going to say that. It was a bit of a joke. Obviously, he did get battered in the Carabao Cup semi-final. We're out of the cups, great. But Michael Carrick, is a decent manager, did a good job at Middlesbrough, has some coaching experience. I'm open to Michael Carrick, obviously not as the long-term option, but as the short-term option. It kind of makes a bit of sense. But he worked with a good player called Hayden Hackney. And we're going to talk about Hayden Hackney because Man United need a midfielder. Said midfield is available for £15 million. You could say, but we spent 15 million to sack Amarim and pay out all his coaching staff. So that's where the Hayden Hackney funds are gone. You could say, Alice, is Hayden Hackney good enough? That is the big question. The way I look at it is Carrick worked with Hackney. Hackney was key for Carrick. Hackney's available for £15 million. Hackney almost left Middlesbrough in the summer. We need three midfielders. Hackney now, and then in the summer, Baleba Anderson. Boom, midfield rebuild done. Tottenham are looking at Hackney. For me, Adam Wharton came to Crystal Palace in January 2 years ago from the Championship. Adam Wharton's impact at Crystal Palace was the reason they had a really good end to the season and beat us 4-0 2 years ago. You know, that's what I mean. Carrick will be a breath of fresh air. I hope it works out and another ex-player, and not another ex-player ruined by this club. I mean, Carrick can never be ruined by Man United because he's coming as interim. I'm going to say this now. Because I feel like Darren Fletcher is now being held to higher standards than Ruben Amarim all of a sudden. You can't hold interim managers to the same standard as managers that have been in the club a year and had 200 million plus spent on them. Do you know what I mean? You know, you can argue Ruben Amarim could have had more time and maybe should have been given to the end of the season, given the fact that we are now going to bring in an interim to the end of the season, and this was Amarim's squad. But I've seen people hold Darren Fletcher to a higher standard than Ruben Amarim. And I'm like, Darren Fletcher is just here for 2 games. He has no managerial experience. This is his first 2 games ever managing. These are none of his players. And he's now being held to this. I'm like, guys, they're an interim. I don't think Man United will ruin Carrick because he's an interim. Do you know what I mean? If it fails, he's an interim. This isn't his squad. He hasn't had much time. You know, if he succeeds, brilliant, great. You know, maybe we pivot to McKenna in the summer. But, you know, if we were bringing in a permanent manager in January, got this permanent manager 2-3 good signings in January, and this permanent manager is crap in May, you then go, okay, but we can't be holding Fletcher and Carrick to like ridiculous standards when they are an interim. You've got to remember that. You know, like Ragnick wasn't great. We haven't had great interim managers when you think about it. Alice, it ain't about standards from what I've seen. It's people fighting back to the nonsense that a back four fixes us overnight. I think we're better in a back four. I think Ruben Amarim played a back four versus Bournemouth and we were better. Then he went to a back 5 and we conceded 2 goals. Ruben Amarim played a back 4 in the first half versus Newcastle and we're much better. He went to a back 5 in the second half and we were much worse. Ruben Amarim played a back 4 in moments of the Villa game, and even though we lost the Villa game, we played a lot better in that Villa game than we did in the Wolves game when we drew 1-1, where we played a back 5, you know. We played a back five versus Wolves, who are even worse than Burnley, and Le Mans is the only reason we didn't lose to Wolves, and Wolves had lost 13 consecutive games in a row. I think we are better in a back four, naturally, but I don't think it's game-changing. And I've always said that. I said, I think we're better in a back four, but I said we still have the same crap midfield, and that was shown today. The most frustrating part, though, was the best chances always fall to Delo. The best chances always fall. We could have actually beat Brighton. Do you know what the annoying part is? Like, we could have beat Brighton and we could have beat Burnley if we could hit a barn door. Dallo. I can't. You know what? I'm not going to talk about Dallo because we need to focus our negative attention on Glazers and Ineos. But my. Can't hold to same standard, but we can't fall off a cliff either. 100%. Like, if Michael Carrick loses 8 games in a row, he's got to go. Do you know what I mean? But you can't hold him to the same standard because he is an interim. He's in none of his signings. He's just come in. You know, people are expecting Darren Fletcher to do in 2 games what Amarim couldn't do in 14 months. People are like, Darren Fletcher didn't win this game, you know, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you're expecting Darren Fletcher to do in 2 games what Ruben Amarim couldn't do in 14 months. Like, come on, guys. Like, we've got to be a bit realistic with the standards here as well. Who are contenders for permanent job? Apparently, like Ancelotti and Tuchel, but I think we'll know more nearer the time. To be honest, we should have signed a midfielder. We could have gotten top 4 with no struggle. I said this in August. I said it in August. I did a big rant video on it in August, and I had people tell me to calm down. And I said, don't tell me to calm down. We need a midfielder. We will see. I got told to calm down when I went on a massive rant about us not signing a midfielder. And we can see it now. We can see it. We needed a midfielder. We were saying a year ago we needed a midfielder. We were saying all throughout summer we needed a midfielder. And surprise, surprise, we're saying in January we need a midfielder. Who would have guessed? Is Luke Shaw injured? No, I think they were just resting him. We're going to talk about Hayden Hackney. We're going to talk about Michael Carrick. Yes, get into the news. And then we will talk about long-term manager options. We will talk about everything we need to talk about. You know, manager re-envisionment. Alice, Ten Hag won these trophies easy. I mean, Ten Hag was very good in the cup games, to be fair to him. But yeah, our midfield's been poor for a while. Our recruitment in midfield has been shocking. Agate, Amrabat, Eriksson, Mount and Casemiro are the only midfielders we signed in 4 years. Nuts. We got rid of all of our attackers over the last year and we need to concentrate on bringing in forwards last summer. True, but we had funds for a midfielder. We have 65 million for Semenyo. You're telling me they can't even bring in a £40 million midfielder to do a job? There's definitely a like, do you know what I mean? Like, I get, this is my mindset with midfield. I get that Anderson and Baleba is what you want, and you can't get them till summer, and there's no point getting someone for the sake of it. But I'm also like, we desperately need a midfielder. Liverpool, when they couldn't get Moises Caicedo and Lavia, and Moises Caicedo was Liverpool's #1 target, they went and signed Gravenberch for £30 million. They went and signed McAllister for £35 million, and they won the league. Okay, we couldn't get Baleba. We can't get Anderson right now. But when Liverpool couldn't get Moises Caicedo, who they desperately wanted, and Jude Bellingham, who they desperately wanted, and Romeo Lavia, who they desperately wanted, they found Gravenberch for £30 million, who was one of the best midfielders in the league last season when they won the league. You can't tell me that even if we couldn't get Baleba, like, if I'm Man United owner and we can't get Baleba, I'm annoyed, I'm frustrated. But you can't tell me there isn't a midfielder out there that's maybe 30, 40 million pounds that would instantly improve this squad. I tell you what, they might not be Elliot Anderson level, but there's midfielders out there that would probably cost 30 to 40 million pounds, which would be a huge upgrade on Agate. You know, Liverpool even brought Endo in, who helped stabilise the ship. You know, when Liverpool couldn't get the midfielder they want, they were like, well, we'll just bring in Endo. And then the next season they tried to get Subamendi and they failed, and then they turned Gravenberch into a 6. Like, Liverpool wanted Caicedo, £100 million midfielder. They couldn't get him. Gravenberch, McAllister. What? Like, we can do so. Okay, we can't get Anderson now. We can't get Baleba now. But we can do something. Like, top clubs would do something. You know, City brought in Nico Gonzalez last January. Top clubs find a way to do something. But yeah. Anyway, let's dive into the news on Carrick, and then we will rant about midfielders. But can't even gamble for 15 million on Ruben Neves. Hayden Hackney, Ruben Neves, 15 million pounds. Like, for me, we need 3 midfielders. One could be a 15, 20 million pound midfielder. Two will be 80 million pound fielders. Why don't we get the 15 million pound midfielder now to get us to the end of the season? Because now we're going to play midfield 3 under Carrick. We're going to need 3 midfielders and not 2 as well. So that's another thing that people aren't touching upon. But let's dive into the news. In the last 12 hours, Michael Carrick has made important progress in talks with Manchester United. His meeting with United was very, very positive in terms of tactics and ideas. Carrick is becoming the leading candidate for the interim job. Manchester United Chiefs were aiming to have an appointment in place before players returning to training on Wednesday. Michael Carrick is frontrunner. So we could know tonight or tomorrow. Most likely tonight, I think. It was also said that Darren Fletcher is in line to potentially assist Michael Carrick as coach. It is thought another coach coming in to support Carrick would be on the cards as well. So Amarim wanted Hayden this January, got sacked, and we're getting Hayden Hackney now. We're embarrassing. Well, first of all, Amarim didn't want Hayden Hackney. Second of all, we might not be getting Hayden Hackney. Third of all, he's linked because Carrick worked with him at Middlesbrough. Amarim never wanted Hayden Hackney. Amarim said himself he'd rather not sign anyone than sign the wrong player. Hayden Hackney is not an Amarim midfielder. Amarim wanted a physical powerhouse midfielder, not a technical midfielder. Hayden Hackney is a technical midfielder. Amarim would not have liked Hayden Hackney. Even though I think we needed him, Amarim would not have liked Hayden Hackney, so he didn't want Hackney. He said he'd rather sign no one than sign the wrong player. Amarim got sacked because he called out the board because the board were telling him what to do. And we might get Hayden Hackney now. Carrick's coming in because Carrick has worked with Hayden Hackney and we've been linked to him. Just to clarify that. I don't think Amarim would have ever wanted Hayden Hackney. I don't think, Amarim wanted a belabor, physical... Amarim would have taken Conor Gallagher over Hayden Hackney any day of the week. Whereas a Michael Carrick would probably take a Hayden Hackney over a Conor Gallagher. I feel like that's the best way to explain it. Apparently, we'd only do Gallagher if it's a loan. Amarim was very specific about who he wanted. Don't get me wrong, we should have brought Amarim in a midfielder, but Amarim was very specific that we cannot bring in this player, and this player. He'd rather have no one, which I think is wrong. I think, fair enough, save the funds. But we needed a midfielder. We need technical players. 90% of our players all over the pitch are crap on the ball. Hackney fits the ball. Yeah, Hackney's a little mini Adam Wharton for me. He's a little mini Adam Wharton for me. He's got a good physicality, but I think it's his technicality. Do you know what's mad about Hackney is I think under Amarim, had we moved Bruno to the 10 role, I think Hayden Hackney would have done quite well in the Bruno role under Ruben Amarim because he's a bit more defensive than Bruno. He's known for those line-breaking passes and creativity. But yeah. So let's talk about Hayden Hackney. So obviously Michael Carrick set to come into Man United, and there's all this talk about Hayden Hackney. Now, Hayden Hackney has been linked to Premier League clubs in January. Middlesbrough do not want to sell, but obviously if a certain bid comes in over a certain price, they're not going to say no. And United now apparently are keeping an eye on the Hayden Hackney situation. Now, could this just be completely made up because Michael Carrick's coming in, Middlesbrough, we've been linked to Hayden Hackney before, blah, blah, blah. The day Ruben Amarim was in the door, you got to remember this. The day Ruben Amarim was in the door, these journalists were telling us we were going to sign Gyökeres and Diamonde and Trincao and Hjulman. We were linked to about 6 sporting players before Amarim had even got to Manchester. We were linked to about 6 sporting players within Amarim's first week, and the only one we actually went for was Gyökeres. So Carrick comes in, media needs something to write, instantly link us to Hayden Hackney. Do you know what I mean? If we brought in McKenna in the summer, I feel like we'd be linked to Leif Davis because we need a left back. He's left back at Ipswich, It is one of those. We bring in, I don't know, Glasner will be linked to Wharton. We'll be linked. Do you know? We've already been linked to Wharton, but do you know what I mean? I feel like there's that element of guesswork. But I wanted to talk about Hayden Hackney because I don't know if he's good enough for Man United. But I also know that it's £15 million. We spent more sacking Ten Hag and Ruben Amarim. Why don't we look at it? We need a midfielder. Okay, ideally, Man United go and put 60 million on Manu Kone and see what Roma do. Put 65 million on Baleba and see what Brighton do. Baleba back from AFCON, maybe he pushes the move. That is the ideal situation. But would you rather United do absolutely F all, and we go from now to the end of the season where Champions League football is possible, but we don't get it because we don't sign a midfielder and we fall off? Or would you rather United take a risk, bring in a midfielder that isn't proven, but that midfielder might help us get Champions League football? I just see it as Champions League football is £100 million more for Man United. So if someone says, bring in a midfielder and you've got a chance of getting a Champions League football, which is 100 million more in the bank, if I'm the owner of Man United, I'm bringing in a midfielder. Even if it's not the midfielders I want, I'm looking at an alternative. It doesn't matter if it's an interim manager. I think, well, it doesn't matter if it was a permanent manager or an interim manager. Whoever manages this club will need a midfielder. Pep Guardiola will not be able to do anything without a midfielder if he went and took the Man United job tomorrow. So for me, I don't know why they aren't considering taking the risk. Because look, I don't know if Hayden Hackney would be good enough for Manchester United. I think that you can be a very good player and you can be good enough for the Premier League, and Hayden Hackney is definitely good enough for the Premier League, but that doesn't mean you'll be good enough for Man United. Do you know what I mean? You can be a good player, you can be good enough for the Premier League, but you might not be good enough for Man United. Take Anthony Elanga. Good player, very good at Nottingham Forest, not so good at Newcastle, but wasn't good enough for Manchester United. Yeah, there's a lot of players that are good players, but they weren't just good enough for Man United. And, you know, Hayden Hackney might be one of those players, but it's £15 million. It's like Dan James. We spent 15 million on Dan James. We sold him 2 years later for 30 million. Let's say we bring in Hayden Hackney. He's all right. If it's 15 million pounds, we might sell him in 2 years for 25 million. And it's like, well, actually, Dan James, even though it wasn't good enough, wasn't a bad deal because we made profit on him and he helped us out here and there. And it's like, if you desperately need a midfielder, you either continue from now to the end of the season with the same midfield that we know doesn't work, or you spend 15 million, you take a risk. It might work, it might not work, but you might as well take that risk. And, you know, this was obviously old tweets on Hayden Hackney, but Hayden Hackney can progress, create, carry, and take on opponents. Off the ball, he's a hard worker, covering ground with good intensity, which is what Amarim would like, but I think he's better on the ball. In a strange way, he's the pivot version of Bruno. If you look at the blue stats, they're his passing statistics. 89 for passing. His passing metrics are fantastic. He was fantastic for Carrick at Middlesbrough. You compare him to the likes of Elliot Anderson. Hayden Hackney's the darker green. When it comes to progressive carries, very similar to Elliot Anderson. When it comes to progressive carry tendency, higher than Elliot Anderson. He's lower than Elliot Anderson when it comes to stats like aerial duels won, recoveries, a lot of the off-the-ball stats, don't get me wrong. But on the ball stats, he's higher than Anderson. Of course, one is in the Championship, one is in the Premier League. La la la. I'm not saying that Hayden Hackney is better than Elliot Anderson, but if we're looking at an Elliot Anderson profile of player and we're looking at Adam Wharton profile of player, Hayden Hackney has a lot of traits that can be similar to both those players. Yes, the Premier League is a huge step up from the Championship. Do not get me wrong, but Adam Wharton 2 years ago came into Crystal Palace and boom. You know, Hayden Hackney could have a good impact. I don't know if he's good enough, but he was good under Carrick. I don't know if he's Man United level, but I just think going for Hayden Hackney, spending 15 million on him, is better than not signing a midfielder, especially when your interim worked with him. And people will say, but what's the point in spending 15 million on a midfielder for an interim manager who's going to be gone at the end of the summer? Because even if Carrick is on at the end of the summer, we need a midfielder anyway. It wasn't like we didn't need a midfielder when Amarim was here. We needed a midfielder when Amarim was here. We would need a midfielder if Ollie was here. We'd need a midfielder if Carrick was here, Van Nistelrooy was here. We need a midfielder if Moyes came back. It doesn't matter who comes in the door, we will need a midfielder. So it's not bringing him in for Carrick, it's bringing him in because of the fact that we need a midfielder. You know, of course, I would rather go with a Baleba, go with a Manu Kone, but I feel like to ignore it would be nuts. He also has box-to-box capabilities, exactly. Like, he's not a DM. He's not someone that comes in and plays DM, you know, but I feel like it's better than nothing. When Casemiro doesn't play, we fall off a cliff. The 3 or 4 games this season that Casemiro's not started, we've lost. No Casemiro versus Brighton, we lose. No Casemiro versus Grimsby, we lose. No Casemiro in starting 11, we lose. Every time we take Casemiro off, we capitulate. The amount of times we're doing all right, like we take Casemiro off. Do you remember I think it might have been the Burnley game. We took Casemiro off. Was it what game was it that we were like 3-0 up him and we almost bowled because we took Casemiro off? But we ended up winning just about in the end. But we conceded goals as soon as Casemiro came off. You know, he's not necessarily a Casemiro replacement now 6, but I feel like it's better than doing nothing. Would you try Sekou Kone? I mean, that's a big ask. A big ask, probably. I would have given him a debut if we were playing Grimsby or something, but it's a big ask. Plenty of players have signed from the Championship and done well. Exactly. Do you know what annoys me, Alice? Isn't that we're knocked out the FA Cup to Brighton? It's still that Grimsby have done better than us in both cup competitions. Yeah. It still annoys me to this day that we played one of our strongest 11s versus Grimsby and we couldn't beat them. We've got a 40-game season. Like, I'm annoyed about Brighton, but to lose to Grimsby is, oh my. The fact we lost to Grimsby, it still winds me up to this day. I'm not going to lie to you. And the worst part is we've got City and Arsenal next. We're knocked out the FA Cup and we've got City and Arsenal next. I really cannot be bothered. Man United have recalled Ethan Wheatley from loan, but he's expected to be loaned out again. So I don't think we plan to play Ethan Wheatley, but we've recalled Ethan Wheatley from loan in terms of news. There was rumours that we were going to recall Harry Amos from loan, but I think he's doing so well, there's just no point changing it up. Apparently, they want him to go to a better club. Alice, what do you think is Carrick as interim? I actually prefer Carrick to Ollie. Ollie was more vibes. Carrick was more tactical. I prefer Carrick to Ollie. It wouldn't have been my pick. Not confident he succeeds, but I think there's a good manager in Carrick, and I'll support him unless it's absolutely atrocious. Then I might say, but he's an interim. We can't be holding him to ridiculous standards. Wilcox relegated Southampton. I feel like they were relegated before he came in, but I might be wrong with that. Same situation. Why club avoided top class 9s in recent years to save on fee and especially wages instead of prioritising potentially higher finish on the table. Yeah. We've ignored Midfield, we've ignored top class 9s because it's all about spending money. What's your prediction for the Manchester derby? I think City will win 2-1, but you never know. You never know. Pep doesn't have a good record against interims. But City just scored 10, so they'll be in the mood. You just know Semenyo's going to score. You know Semenyo's going to score. You just know Semenyo is going to score. Alice, I don't get the Amarim re-envisionment after this Brighton game. People forgot he lost to Grimsby, couldn't beat a 10-man Everton with his strongest squad, and let Wolves get their first point in 14 matches. I don't know. Like, it would make more sense if it was Ten Hag re-envisionment. Like, obviously, Amarim beat Brighton 4-2. But Amarim had been Man United manager for a year, had beat Brighton 4-2. Cool. Amarim this time last year lost 3-1 to Brighton. It was one of the worst performances he'd ever seen. Do you know what I mean? And I was saying the same thing this time last year when Amarim lost 3-1 to Brighton and said this is on the board. They need to back Amarim in January. The interim manager needs to be backed. I think you can say, look, sacking a manager doesn't solve all our issues, which I think every sane Man United fan has said for years. I think Amarim deserved to be sacked. I think Amarim was atrocious. But as I said, if you watch my video the day they announced the Amarim sacking, I said, I'm not celebrating this. I said Amarim should have been sacked. He deserved to be sacked. But I said, I'm not celebrating Amarim being sacked because he wasn't sacked for his performances. He was sacked because he called out the board. And a new manager doesn't come in and instantly transform us like people think. A new manager, I think, could do a better job. But it's not a bigger change as people think. We still need a midfielder. And I said that the day Amarim was sacked. But there's now re-envisionment. And I'm like, I don't get it. Look, you can agree. You can have the thought Amarim shouldn't have been sacked. Board messed up. I think everyone's right to have that thought. But the re-envisionment, I'm like, he had a 32% win rate. It took him a year to win back-to-back games. He lost to Grimsby, West Ham, Wolves. You look at 3-0 loss to Bournemouth last season. Why are we holding Fletcher to the same standard as Amarim? Fletcher couldn't do in 2 games what Amarim couldn't do in 14 months. People are mad at Fletcher about it, but if it was Ten Hag re-envisionment, I'd almost understand it more. I'd be like, because, when people are saying if Amarim was still here, we would have beat Burnley, we would have beaten Brighton. Would we? We don't know that. That's like me saying if we never sacked Ten Hag, we would be in the Champions League. Because to be honest, I generally believe that Ten Hag would not have lost the Europa League final to Spurs. Ten Hag, cup finals. He's the guy. Saying Amarim would have beat Burnley and Brighton is the same as me saying if we never sacked Ten Hag, we'd be in the Champions League. Because yes, I don't think Ten Hag would have lost a final to that crap Ange Postecoglou Spurs side that had Maddison, Kulusevski and Burville injured. We played a full-strength Spurs earlier in the season when Spurs were actually winning games under Ange. Ange started last season quite well. Like, after 12 games, Spurs were in a good place. And then they fell off a cliff second half of the season because they got all the injuries. Yeah. They lost Berthwell, that was the best player last season. They lost Madison, they lost Kulusevski just before the final. Like, imagine if I'm there. Like, it's like me saying after the Europa League final, Ten Hag would have won that. Saying after this Brighton game, Amarim would have won that. We don't know that. We wouldn't have had Ahmed and Bumo this time, and Bumo and Ahmed, who were our best players versus Brighton when we last played them. Like, and also, I will say this now, I don't think Ten Hag would have made it to the Europa League final. I think Ten Hag would have won the Europa League final as a one-off game because we know what Ten Hag was like as a tactical manager in finals. Very good. But I actually don't think Ten Hag would have beaten Lyon. I think Amarim beat Lyon. I don't think Ten Hag would have beaten Lyon. But I think Ten Hag would have beaten Spurs in the final. So I don't get the manager re-envisionment. You know, you remember the only manager we didn't get big re-envisionment for has been Mourinho. But then recently we've had Mourinho re-envisionment when we weren't winning trophies for a bit. Like, you know, we've got, I mean, I've even seen Ragnick re-envisionment. Ragnick should have stayed as a sporting director, but let's not re-envision Ragnick, bro. Like, Ragnick did a good job at Austria, should have stayed as sporting director, but yeah, I don't get the re-envisionment every time we lose a game. Like, it's mad. You got to remember that Ten Hag was only 4 points off Champions League football when he was sacked. Amarim had us 20 plus points off Champions League football by the end of the season. That's what I mean. It's like what? Why are we re-envisioning managers? You know, we lose to Brighton, Amarim re-envisionment. That's like saying after the Europa League final, Ten Hag would have won that game. Ten Hag probably would have won that game, but he might have not got to the final. You know, I saw people saying Ten Hag, if we never sacked Ten Hag, we would have finished in the top 6 last season. Ten Hag was 4 points of Champions League football when he was sacked, and Amarim ended up having us like 20 points of Champions League football. But Ten Hag was also playing atrocious football when he was sacked and was ignoring Ahmad for Anthony and Forson. Do you know what I mean? Alice Carrick, or whoever it is, should have been appointed by today, with City coming up on Saturday morning. Whoever's appointed is just going to be a sacrificial lamb. And I agree with Gina's here. I agree. The worst part about the sacking Amarim was they didn't have a contingency plan. That is the worst part. I agree Ruben Amarim should have been sacked, but I was angry the day Ruben Amarim was sacked. And do you know why I was angry? Because he wasn't sacked for his performances. He wasn't sacked for his 32% win rate. He was sacked to please Jason Wilcox's ego. That was it. You did not sack the manager because of Grimsby or Everton or West Ham or Wolves. You sacked him to please Jason Wilcox's ego. And because the sacking came out of nowhere because they had no plans to sack Amarim, when they sacked Amarim, they did not have a contingency plan. So we played 2 of our most important games with Darren Fletcher with 0 managerial experience to bring back Michael Carrick. Lack of contingency plan, and Michael Carrick is going to be a sacrificial lamb. And sadly, there's certain Manchester United fans that want Michael Carrick to fail so their boy Amarim can look good. Michael Carrick is a Manchester United legend. Michael Carrick has still not been replaced since he left the club. We haven't had a midfielder that's been Michael Carrick level since he's left. If you're a Manchester United fan and you want Michael Carrick to lose to make Amarim look good, then you are not a Manchester United fan. You're an Amarim sexual. Michael Carrick is basically the sacrificial lamb. Michael Carrick has got a horrible job to do. He's going to be thrown under the bus by this ownership. And sadly, he won't have the fans behind him because fans want him to fail because they want to kiss Amarim. Like, it's nuts. There was a lot of Man United fans celebrating us lose yesterday. Like, actual Man United fans celebrating us lose. Our season is over in January. We're out the cup competitions in January. And you're celebrating because of Amarim. You can have the opinion that Amarim shouldn't have been sacked. You can have the opinion that sacking Amarim was a mistake. Most people I know that think sacking Amarim was a mistake was gutted that we lost. But there's a small percentage of fans that were really happy that we lost because they like Amarim, who had a 32% win rate, more than the club. I don't get why there were fans hate watching us. Like, if you're a Man United fan, why would you want us to lose? I didn't like Ruben Amarim, but I wanted us to win every game. When we lost to Villa, I was like, guys, don't go on Ruben Amarim. He coached a win. When we drew to Bournemouth, I said, look, don't go on Ruben Amarim. He coached a win. Do you know what I mean? I wanted us to win every game. I don't get it. I don't blame Fletcher. I think sacking a manager mid-season is a recipe for disaster. Even so, if they say they really want wait for after AFCON. To be honest, my mindset was this, and I said this January 1st before Amarim was sacked. I said Amarim should have gone ages ago for his performances, but I said I'd rather us go spend a load of money in January and keep Amarim to the end of the season than do nothing in January and sack Amarim. And this is coming from someone that wanted Amarim to go. Said on January 1st, I'd rather spend a load of money, keep Amarim, and Amarim proves me wrong, than do nothing in January and sack him. You know, Rangnick should have stayed. Should have stayed as working on the board, but not as a manager. Yes, I agree. The Amarim sexuals need to move on now. The Messiah's gone. I just think it's weird, this re-envisionment and compare it and holding down Fletcher to the same standards. I just think it was a bit weird. You know, I just think like your team lost and you're happy. I didn't get it personally. It was expensive to satisfy Wilcox's ego. That's the problem. The biggest issue with Ruben Amarim being sacked was because of Jason Wilcox's ego. It was because of Jason Wilcox's ego, and I think people need to remember that. I think there's been too much toxicity between the Man United fan base. You want an Amarim sacked. You're wrong. You're right. Rah, rah, everyone going at each other. No, let's go at the board. Let's go at Ineos. Let's stop going at each other. Let's go at the board. Let's go at Ineos. As we said, he was sacked because of Wilcox's ego, not because of his performances. We need to focus all our negative energy towards the board, towards Ineos, but most importantly, towards the Glazers. Are people forgetting how awful these Glazers are? You know, there's a few things going on behind the scenes, a few protests being planned. The best thing we can do, guys, is get a match called off. The best thing we could do is get that Manchester derby called off. Because the last time we got a match called off, Woodward was sacked. Ed Woodward would still be here to this. Maybe not with Ineos coming in. Ed Woodward would have not been sacked if it wasn't for us getting the Liverpool game called off. So the best thing we can do is have a protest, get the Man City game called off, and watch them sign a midfielder. Watch them sign a midfielder. Imagine that. You get Man City game called off. You do a protest. Watch them go sign a midfielder. Because the only thing that scares them is when we get games called off, because that costs them a lot of money. You know, why would any fan want us to do poorly to be proved right? We failed to qualify for Europa. It's a 2-year setback. I know, it's nuts. It's nuts why fans want us to fail. The fan base needs to wake up. We're going nowhere under the ownership. I agree. The most worrying thing is players lost confidence on what happened recently, especially the board. The only players I was happy with yesterday were Sesko, Lacey and Maino. And Lacey got a red card. I'm going to say this now. I get why Lacey was sent off. It's in the rule book. But it's such a bullshit rule. I'm sorry. Like, Lacey showed a bit of emotion. He wanted to make things happen. Lacey showed more in half an hour than half the squad showed in the last few months. Lacey, I'd understand if Lacey chucked the ball at the ref or chucked the ball at a Brighton player. He chucks the ball at his own feet. If I'm a referee, yeah, I ain't going to book an 18-year-old kid for showing some emotion when he's 2-1 down. He's not caused any harm. He just throws the ball down. Because Van Dijk versus Aston Villa did the exact same thing and he didn't get a booking. Virgil van Dijk versus Aston Villa did the exact same thing and he didn't get a booking. And I actually think it was the same ref. And let me check that. I think it was Simon Hooper. Let me see who was the ref. Who was the ref of that game? I don't know who the ref of the game was. I think it was the exact same manager who sent Lacey off for throwing the ball down, who ignored it when Van Dijk did it. Not manager, ref, but I need to check that. So that's what annoys me as well. Other players have done that and not been booked. For me, referees are hated because of the lack of common sense. I see an 18-year-old frustrated. He's not throwing the ball at anyone. He's not wasting time. He throws the ball down because it was a Man United throw-on. And it was a completely Man United throw-on. The ref got his decision wrong. He's frustrated the ref got his decision wrong. He throws the ball down. Lacey shouldn't do that. Lacey's frustrated. But I think the ref was an absolute joke. And unfortunately, Man United fans are going in on Lacey and having a go at him. The Lacey did more than most of our players. I think the fact that there's now rules where players can't show emotion is making football worse. Players should be able to show emotions without getting a yellow card. Some people think he deserved the red. I don't think he did. I think it's a completely ridiculous rule. You could say it's in the rule book, but it's an absolute ridiculous rule. Especially when Van Dijk does the same and doesn't get a booking. It's just the inconsistencies. But anyway, thank you guys for watching today's live show. I will be back tonight with a video. See you next time. Bye.